Well, we're here on the wonderful River Trent, where I know that a lot of people kind of get a little bit confused and a little bit intimidated by large rivers like this when it comes to decision making as regards the lines to fish and the tackle that you use. I've brought you along here today to just go through my top 5 big river feeder fishing tips. Well, one of the key decisions that you need to make right at the outset is deciding which line you're going to fish on. This is something that a lot of people sometimes get confused about, and what you really need to do is just have a look at the peg as soon as you get there. Just have a look for areas that might be moving faster than others. There might be areas where it's boiling, or there could be slower, steadier areas. If the river is carrying extra water, for example, you might find the fish are in the steadier water, so you might want to target those areas. But when the river's normal level, or even in summer when sometimes rivers are lower, you might want to target the faster moving, more oxygenated areas of the peg as well. So just read the peg once you get to it. The swim behind me, for example, it's got boiling water out to about 6 meters. So that suggests that there are rocks and features down there that's causing all that turbulence. So there might be areas that you want to stay away from because they could be snaggy. Likewise, you might want to fish right on the edge of them. So the more and the further out you go into a river like this, you can honestly expect that the flow is going to be stronger, and therefore you're going to need a heavier feeder and a thicker tip. So if that is the area that you're thinking of targeting, then you need to reflect that in the type of gear and the tackle that you're going to be setting up to tackle that area. That's why it's important to make all these decisions before you start fishing. Well, when you're fishing on commercial fisheries and many still waters, you'll probably find that 95% of the time you're using the same sort of tip in your feeder rod. When you come to big rivers like this is when it's more important to carry a selection of different tips. I carry quite a large selection in this hard tube. The main river rod that I use is the XD Horizon, and for that rod there are tips that go right the way up to 5 ounce in strength. Now, as you can appreciate, having tips like that, or you carry those for different scenarios that you might be faced with. The key one will be down to the flow of the river. So if it's a fast flowing river, obviously the flow is stronger, so you'll need to put on a stronger tip. And likewise when you're using a heavier feeder, so the heavier feeder you might be using, sometimes you might have feeders on up to 4 or 5 ounce even, sometimes more depending on the conditions and the swim that you're faced with. And in those scenarios, that's when you need to be stepping up to maybe a 4 or even a 5 ounce tip. Now, I carry a selection, and it's one of the things where obviously, I've talked about it before, where you can quite easily set your rods up at home, but to be quite honest, you don't really know when you're at home what kind of a peg you're going to be faced with, and you don't know what kind of flow you're going to be faced with. So a quick tip for you is, when you get to your peg, if you're not quite sure of what strength tip you're going to need, one of the things that you can do is, while you're setting all your tackle up, when you get your rods out for the first time, once you've decided whereabouts you're actually going to be fishing in the peg, just clip a bomb on, a nice heavy bomb that's going to be hopefully enough to hold bottom, or similar to the weight feeder you're going to be using, and just cast that out into your swim. Don't do it with a feeder, because on most feeder fishing events you're not allowed to do that. So just a bomb, and if you put that out into the peg that's going to hold bottom in the area where you're expecting to fish, then you can put your rod on the rod rest and just see if that tip is strong enough or not. Ideally, you don't want the tip to be bent right over. You want it to have a little bit of a bend in it so it's going to show any drop back bites, but you won't really know that until you get a bomb or a weight on out there and get fishing. So that's the kind of thing you want to find out before your session starts or before the match starts. You don't want to be finding that out during the match. Okay, so carry a rod that's got a nice selection of tips. If the tips like the Matrix ones, they're very, very clearly marked what the strengths are. Some are color coded, but in my opinion, you can't get better than having tips that have got ounce weights on them, because they're very, very easy to select for your session. And if you store them in a tip tube like I do, upside down, then when you take them out of the tube like that, all the weights are there facing you. They're not at the bottom end, so you can quickly and easily select the right tip and make sure you've got the right one in for the job. Well, when you're fishing rivers like this, one of the key words that you need to keep in mind is the word durable. These are natural venues, they're wild venues. This swim that I'm faced with today, there could be rocks out there, there could be snags, and hopefully we're going to, you're going to be catching fish in the ideal scenario. So you want something that's going to be able to take a little bit of stick. I like to use tackle that's nice and robust. 6 and 8 pound reel lines are my choice, and if I'm casting any sort of a distance or a heavy feeder, then I will use shock leaders as well, and they can be upwards of 8 pounds. Just nice durable tackle. Rig wise, this is a nice simple typical feeder rig. This is one that's just where I'm presenting the feeder in a series of loops. That's just one loop there, and then it's got loops below it. It's a typical river feeder rig that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and that is a rig that you can use in lots and lots of different scenarios. One of the key parts to this rig is obviously you want the line to be nice and durable, like I say, 6 pound upwards, it could be even 8 pound. All right, feeder beads are a great little bit of kit. That just basically means that your feeder is free running in there on a plastic bead, which is a very solid plastic bead. It's made from one mold, so that won't split, and built into that is a snap link swivel. When you're fishing rivers like this, you quite often have to keep changing feeders just to find out what the right weight feeder is to hold bottom, and having a snap link swivel will allow you to do that. The style of feeder you can see there is very, very typical of a feeder that's suited for river fishing, and this is the style that I much prefer. These come in a selection of different sizes and weights, so that means that if your feeder isn't quite heavy enough to hold bottom, you can just step up or down accordingly to the version of the feeder that you need, without having to add extra lead and weight to the feeders like you do with some feeders, because that can cause tangling, and it's obviously a lot more time consuming. It's got a side, the weight is on the side, which means it's suited for sitting on the river bed, and this style has also got grooves in the bottom as well, which again helps to grip the bottom. Okay, so it's just about keeping everything really nice and tangle free, really durable, and when you've got a selection of feeders like this, you can just add and take off feeders just so that you can get that balance just right. But the key to it all is just make sure it's nice and robust, and you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. Well, when you're fishing big rivers like this, it's important the way that you actually put your feeder in and the way that you set it up. On many rivers, certainly when you're fishing with smaller baits like maggot and castor and even worm, sometimes missed bites can be a problem for a lot of people, and a lot of that can be down to the way that you've actually set up your rig. This particular peg that I'm faced with today, I'm only fishing 15 meters, but the process is the same. I've got a 60 gram feeder on, and I'm not fishing with a line clip. Now the reason for that is when you're fishing at short range like this, you can generally gauge it quite well what the range is that you're fishing, all right? But the key reason for that is because I'm fishing with a bow in the line. Now basically what that means is I put the feeder out to where I'm going to be fishing. I just stop the feeder, I feather it before it hits the surface. I'm casting straight in front of me, feather the feeder, and then I feel the feeder down till it hits the bottom. Then what I do is, as the line tightens, as the flow picks up the line, the tip starts to bend. But what I'm doing is just feeding a little bit of line out, only about 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters, and then putting the bail arm over and then putting the rod on the rest. Now what that means is, what that's basically done is, it means my feeder's heavy enough to hold bottom, but by putting a bow in the line like that, it means that the line is going downstream and then back upstream, back up to the feeder, because the feeder's straight in front of me. Now what that's actually done is it's taken the tension off the line, because the flow touching the line, obviously that puts a tension on the line, and that will move the feeder, or try to move the feeder. By putting a nice bow in the line, you're taking that tension off. So that means I can actually hold bottom there with a lighter feeder than I would be able to use if I had my line direct to it. And because of the nature of the rig that I've got, it's a rig where the feeder is moving within a loop. That means that when I get a bite, it's going to pull the rig so far, pull the line through so far, then it'll pull against the weight of the feeder, and that's when the fish will hook itself. And the tip will you'll either see a pull of the bite, or you'll just see a drop back as the fish has dislodged the feeder. And hopefully that will mean that every bite results in a fish. Well, for this sort of fishing, there are a couple of things that really are quite specialised if you're going to be going out and doing this sort of fishing. One of them is the feeder rest. Now, this is the new 3D mega feeder arm. It's got 2 arms on it. That gives it stability. It's just on the front leg of my foot plate. Super rigid, and it's obviously extendable as well, because on some occasions you might find that, you know, if there isn't much flow, you might have your rod a little bit lower, or if it's deep close in and you're fishing close in, you might want the rod a little bit lower. But on the flip side of that, you might be casting further and you might really need to get more line off the water so you can get away with a lighter feeder. So that on you know, those sorts of scenarios, you might want your rod even higher, and having an extendable rigid feeder arm like that, that's going to allow you to do that. And that's the compact. It just compacts away really nice into your hold all. And the other bit of kit that I know a lot of people don't really give much thought to, and that's the keep net. I always use the 4-meter River keep net. As the name suggests, it's 4 meters in length. It's got square rings on it, so that basically means it's not going to roll, obviously in a river, because you obviously don't want to risk damaging the fish. You want to protect the fish the best you can, and it stays in place better. The edges of the rim are reinforced as well, so it's, you know, for extra durability. And the mesh has got wider holes in it, so it's a wider mesh, and that is basically to allow the flowing water to flow through the net, which means that's going to help stop it getting displaced, so it's going to stay where it is. 2 little bits of kit that might not seem a big deal, but when you get them and when you use them in the right scenario, you'll realize that they are really quite specific to this sort of fishing, but very, very valuable.